Hello, Mrs. Ayubi. I'm Jack Payton, and I'll be presenting 4-6 factoring review, focusing on trinomials and factoring by GCF. So first, let's jump into the first example when a is equal to 1. Our example or our equation is going to be x squared plus 5x plus 6. So when a is equal to 1, you just have to find two factors that multiply together and equal 6, but add together to equal 5. So if we list out the multiples of 6, it's 2 times 3, which equals 6, and 6 times 1, which equals 6. It doesn't matter the order, you just have to have two sets of numbers that equal 6. Now if you add 2 plus 3 together, it equals 5, but if you add 6 plus 1, it equals 7. So you can cross out this one. We're going to be using these two factors, and you just insert it into the equation. So x plus 2 and x plus 3. And that's going to be the factored form of this equation. If you want to check it, you can multiply or double distribute FOIL, and it should equal our starting equation. So now we can move on to our second example, which is going to be when a does not equal to 1. Our example is going to be 2x squared, 2x squared minus 5x minus 12. When a is not equal to 1, you have to multiply it times the c, or the negative 12 in this case. So 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. Now, just like before, you have to find what two factors of negative 24 equal negative 5 when you add them. So we know it's going to be a positive and a negative. So an 8 and a 3 and a negative 8, as we need to equal negative 5 when we add together. So now you're just going to put it back in the equation. So 2x squared minus 8x plus 3x minus 12. So I just split this middle term and use these two numbers here to put it into the equation. And then you can just factor out any GCFs in these two sets and these two sets. So you can factor out a 2x, and you're left with x minus 4. And you can factor out a 3 here, and you're left with x minus 4 as well. You're going to combine the two outside terms and then the two inside terms. So you're going to end up with 2x plus 3 times x minus 4. That is your final answer for this equation. If you were to multiply these two terms together, you would equal this equation right here, and that's how you factor trinomials. So now we're going to move on to factoring by GCF. This is our first example, and when you factor by GCF, you just have to look for the GCF of every like term. So for the coefficients, it's 2. For the x terms, it's just x, and for the y terms, it's just y. It leaves you left with 3xy plus 4x minus 6x to the power of 5 subtract 2y squared. And that would be the final answer for this equation, as the equation inside the parentheses is in its simplest form. Now we move on to our second example, which is a little bit more difficult. It's going to be 20a squared y plus 14ay subtract 6y. So for this one, you can only take out a 2y. That leaves you with 10a squared plus 7a subtract 3. Now many people would stop here, but the equation inside the parentheses is not in its simplest form. So you have to do what we did earlier with the trinomials. You have to multiply the 10 times the negative 3 and get a negative 30. And then the factors or the multiples would be 10 and negative 3. And then you have to plug it back into the equation. So 10a squared plus 10a minus 3a minus 3. You group these two and these two. You can take out a 10a in this first one, and you're left with a plus 1. You can take out a negative 3 in this one, and you're left with a plus 1. You combine these, so it's going to be 10a minus 3 times a plus 1. And many people would finish there, but you have to leave what you factored out earlier, there, the 2y on the outside, and that would be the simplest form for this equation.
Okay. The method I will now be covering is factoring using difference of two squares. You use this on a binomial equation, and the equation that I have written for this method is 64x squared minus 144x equals 0. So the very first step that we're going to take will be to add 144 to the other side. So you can do that by canceling out the 144 that we currently have on this side and adding 144 to the next side, and you will end up with the equation 64x squared equals 144. Now you will take the square root of both sides, and you will get 8x is the square root of 64x squared, and 12 is the square root of 144. So what you will do is you will take, when you are creating your factors, you will have 8x in one side, in both sides, and what you'll do with the 12 now is there will be a positive 12 and a negative 12. And the reason is because the positive 12 and the negative 12 will cancel out, creating a binomial equation, which you wouldn't have if you put plus 12 on both sides. You would end up with a very different equation. So we will put 8x minus 12 and 8x plus 12. And there you have it. And if you're ever curious whether you did an equation correctly, you can FOIL. So 8x times 8x is 64x squared. 8x times 12 is 96x. Negative 12 times 8x is negative 96x. And negative 12 times positive 12 is negative 144. So the plus 96x and the minus 96x will cancel out, and you will be left with 64x squared minus 144x. We will now be covering factoring for terms using grouping. So this equation is 10x squared minus 5xy plus 8xy minus 4y squared. So what you're going to do to this equation, which looks a little scary at first, well, it scares me anyway, and we're going to split it up into two smaller equations. So you will have 10x squared minus 5xy on one side, and then 8xy minus 4y squared on the other side. So what we're going to do is we're really just going to factor out a GCF. So we can take out a 5x from the first equation, and you will be left with a 2x minus y. And then if you factor out a 4y on this side and end up with a 2x minus y on this side. And so what you do, just like when you factor trinomials, is you will take these two, which will be the same, and then you will take these two and add them, and they will become your factors. So 5x plus 4y and 2x minus y. And it's that easy, and just FOIL to make sure that you're correct.